Hey everyone, it's Unfiltered here, and welcome to the attic. Now today we're talking about some old stuff, and if you're like me, getting a bit older, being a late age millennial, I'd say, you might have lived through some media transitions. And a lot of these media things are making their return these days. So the topic of today's video, as you might have guessed by the title, it is about LoFi-ification by Unfiltered Audio. It's about RC-20, and we're going to talk a little bit about Chow tape as well. But before we get there, I just quickly wanted to talk a little bit about the kind of interesting twilight of media where we as millennials existed in our earlier days. So we were at the tail end of the venerable vinyl, LP, whatever you want to call it. These things were not really mainstay anymore when I was young, although my parents still had a vinyl player. It was rarely ever used. The mainstay media of the time was, I think, pretty safe to say, the cassette deck. Pretty bulky little boy, but of course you also had the portable option, the Walkman. Not a particularly good example. I would definitely recommend looking up some Tecmon to see some more prime examples, but yeah, this was the sort of thing most people had, in which you had your little tapes, which held your sound thingies. Now we were also kind of in the transition zone between these things and these things. The CD. Now there's a lot of stuff going on the internet with tape and vinyl and real VSTs, and the general gist of those VSTs is that they make things sound wobbly and dusty and noisy, even though in reality if you had a decent tape deck or a decent Walkman, it really wasn't that bad. There was actually very little, in a sense, of bad audio quality. I mean, cheaper tapes definitely didn't have the clarity of a good CD, but it wasn't all as bad as it is often advertised with these VSTs. Listening to music back in the day wasn't one big wobbly mess. Well, unless you had a CD and an unbuffered Discman, but that's a story for another time. Although we will kind of cover it a little bit with Lo-Fi-ification. But what I really want to talk about is a little bit about vinyl. Now vinyl does have the needle going through the grooves, and you definitely get some crackles and some little specks when there's dust in the grooves or there's a hair or whatever on your vinyl. You will get those noises. But if you're playing tapes in general, yes, there can be some wah and flutter, but it's really minimal. And if you have a decent tape deck, you will actually get just hi-fi sound out of it. So it is highly impractical to actually use one of these to get anything going on tape saturation and wah and fluttery like. And that's why you're best off just turning to VSTs if you want that more extreme effect. So that's what we're going to do today. We are going to talk a little bit about some Lo-Fi-nator plugins to get some of the charm of these old media, but extricate it to a more audible level. So without further ado, let's head into the DAW.
And here we are, welcome in the DAW. Now it's important to note a few little things. I already made a video about RC-20 and I already made a video about Unfiltered Audio Lo-Fi-ification. So if you want more in detail talks about those, definitely check those out. It's also important to mention that I'm in the Unfiltered Audio beta team, so I've had early access to Lo-Fi-ification, and also I didn't pay for the plugin itself, so take that into considerations when I talk about it. For our sound source, we're using Addictive Drums by XLN Audio, seems fitting, and it's a very clean drum kit, sounds a little like this. Very clean. So let's get RC-20 involved. Let's make that the main focus for this moment right here. So RC-20 is a coloring plugin, gives you a nice big slider up here to do a overall magnitude of all the effects, and they have categorized all the effects into nice little boxes. Noise, wobble, distort, digital, space, and magnetic are all pretty self-explanatory. The magnetic maybe not as much, but you'll hear it when we get there. In the bottom you have some main controls, a gain and a Q, a tone and a out gain, and an out width, so you can make things actually mono from this plugin as well if you want that. Let's get our little beat going and let's mess around with this a little bit. The first thing you can do is you can add noise to your signal. A variety of tastes. And you can either add it at the end of the beginning of the chain, filter it a bit, duck it out, or make it follow the input. And all the controls in RC-20 have this flux controller, which adds randomness and non-linear magic stuff. Aside from noise, you also get a wobble with wall and flutter, which can be set to stereo. I sincerely hope your cassette deck doesn't sound like this. Because you're going to have to do some adjustments if that's the case. Distortion, bunch of distortion modes. With a filter where you can focus the distortion on a range of frequencies. Pretty cool. Digitizer for bit crushing and bitrate reduction. Very nice. Space effects. And a magnetic control. And this is where you can create some dropouts, which is a very fun effect. Once you start combining these effects, especially with the magnitude, you can quite quickly move through a big scala of vibes on your sounds. And the main force of RC-20 is just the immediateness and the quickness with the controls. It's pretty easy to understand which part controls which part of the degradation effect, so you can dial things in quite nicely. There's a good amount of presets included to get you started with your signal degradation. And the most important feature of this entire thing is, of course, this little preset. It's called Snake, and if you save Snake and you override Snake, you can actually play Snake in RC-20. So this gives it a big leg up versus all the competition, but, well, it's not all about playing Snake, although it does help. I think it's important here to note that this is through-the-wall Snake, which is actually a more modern interpretation of Snake. Anyways, enough playing Snake. Let's move on to the next plugin, shall we? Now for the next plugin we have LoFi-ification by Unfiltered Audio. Now it does cover a lot of the same ground as RC-20, although it also does some things a little bit differently. The first thing that's important to notice here is that you can actually change the order of the effects, which is quite nice, and you also get some different effects. And we still have bit crushing available to us here. And sample rate reduction. But you actually get several bit crushing modes. Which just gives you a little bit more range to play around with. There's also a master control for the overall strength, which is quite nice to have. You also get a little bit of the analog thing with the flux, which is basically the wall and flutter effect. And you get an analog compressor. Which is very nice to have. Noise down here. You have several different types of noise, including vinyl, which can also follow transport, or you have an envelope follower. Stereo is available as well. At the bottom we have a filter. Very nice. And we have our output controls with auto gain compensation and a soft clipper. Now some of the things that are very different here is in this spectral thing. Now the weird thing Unfiltered Audio does here is they have a shifter which basically pitch shifts the signal and then shifts it back, and this causes there to be artifacts because pitch shifting ain't perfect. So doing this operation it changes the content of the sound, and you can actually shift quite a bit. Now just the normal shift isn't all that impressive, but once you start to up the iteration, so it actually shifts it more, it's a bit CPU intensive, but it really does create quite a fun. You also have a normal pitch shifter. Very nice. Then you have a ripple effect. Which is a very unstable distortion kind of effect. And an MP3ifier. to make your stuff sound straight from LimeWire, which is a reference most people might get or not. Aside from that, we have convolution, which is pretty neat. If you just quickly want to get that telephone sound, it's right there. And in this corner we have interference. With several modes. Again, it comes with a nice bunch of presets in different categories. Depending on how rough you want to make things. Overall, I would say Lo-Fi-ification is definitely more of a sound designer's tool. It's a little more intensive to really get into because the controls aren't quite as intuitive as RC-20, but it also allows a much wider spectrum of sounds because it just has a few tools that are very unique, like the shifters. Oh, we actually didn't cover the digital skipping. We need to cover the digital skipping. Very nice little stutter effect there, and that's the unbuffered CD player experience. Many of us had that, even with the buffered CD players that always lied about how long they could actually buffer. That's something you experience quite regularly while being on the bus or stuff like that. So that's Lo-Fi-ification. Now our last contestant for Lo-Fi-ification of sounds is a Chow tape model by ChowDSP. Now the interesting thing here is that unlike the other VSTs, which are not especially cheap, this one is actually free, which is very impressive for the features that this VST has. So let's get our beat going again. Let's quickly go through it. We have a main input-output gain with a dry-wet selection. We have filters here. This is very handy. And you actually can change the stereo balance. We have a tape effect. A compressor. And a tone control. And then we get into the loss modes. where you can also set tape degradation. And that's where you get the cutouts. You can also chew the signal. For if you really want to have cuts in your signal. Enable flutter section is of course mandatory. Becomes pretty wild actually. For if you really want to make the worst possible tape deck in the world. Now Chow tape model also comes with a good selection of presets, including some tape models. It has a completely scalable interface. Now the best thing here is that it's an absolutely free VST, which means it has an incredible value because it gives you a lot of the controls the paid competitors have with all the degradation and Unfiltered and lo-fi-ness, while having a price tag of absolutely zero. Now I would highly recommend, if you're just looking for the kind of lo-fi sound, to check out Chow tape model first, see if there's anything you're missing and work your way from there. Of course there are more options than just RC and LoFi-ification, but I think those are the two bigger, more well-known options in the space. Now between RC and lo-fi, again I would say if you're just into creating those kind of old school vibes, it's probably easier to grab RC because it's very easy, very predictable to use. If you want something a little bit more unique with definitely more sound design potential, I would look into LoFi-ification. So there are some options if you're looking to degrade your signal. Check these out. There's demos available. Definitely try it and see what works for you. That's it for this video. If there are any questions, leave them down below. And as always, see you in the next one.